We want to start with an event that took place earlier, earlier this week, and that was a parole hearing for Leonard Peltier, long-running political prisoner here in the United States, really a legend in the fight of Indigenous peoples here in the United States. So perhaps maybe even his last opportunity to get parole, but number of things and a number of pieces there, and we are very, very honored as we move forward on the show here to be joined by Nick Tilsen, who is in Oglala, Lakota, and president and CEO of the NDN Collective. Nick, thank you so much for being here with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
Well, it's an honor to have you here, and I wish everyone knew the story, but for those maybe who don't know Leonard's name, haven't followed his story or his case, who is Leonard Peltier, and how did he end up in this situation of being in prison for many, many decades?
Yeah, so Leonard Peltier has been incarcerated for 49 years. He was a member of the American Indian movement, and he was organizing and supporting people actually in my community on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in the 1970s, when the United States government was engaging in a counterintelligence strategy to basically destroy the American Indian movement. But it was the same counterintelligence strategies that they were using to destroy the Black Panther Party, to disrupt the civil rights movement. And they basically chose the battleground of Pine Ridge to utilize the place to destroy the movement. And it was at a place where there was lots of resistance. There was the siege at Wounded Knee in 1973 that took there. That was a major uprising for Indigenous people in my home territory, but also around the world. And there was this period of time called the Reign of Terror, in which over 60 people were murdered on Pine Ridge. One faction at that time of the corrupt tribal government was being backed by the FBI and the United States government with U.S. taxpaying dollars, and it amounted to a shootout where two FBI agents came up on a camp in Oglala, South Dakota, chasing another vehicle, and a shootout happened, and two FBI agents lost their lives, Kohler and Williams, along with Joe Stone, assassinated in that shootout, who was a member of the American Indian movement and a member of the community, and then Leonard Peltier went on the run, and he was illegally extradited from Canada based on coerced witnesses. His co-defendants, Butler and Robidoux, were actually they actually went to trial and they were acquitted based on means of self-defense. And what they basically did, with Leonard Peltier, is they railroaded him. They coerced witnesses. They made up evidence. They manufactured ballistic evidence. And as a result, Leonard Peltier has been incarcerated for 49 years, one of the longest living political prisoners in American history.
And I'm curious if you could talk a bit about the conditions that he's been subjected to throughout his imprisonment, because he's repeatedly been denied parole over all these years. His health hasn't been in the greatest condition. So yeah, talk about some of those conditions that he's been subjected to as a political prisoner.
He's been in maximum security prison the entire time. Consistently moved from one maximum security prison to the other, whether it was Leavenworth or whether it was Pennsylvania. Right now, he's in Coleman. For the past 13 years, he's been in the Coleman maximum security penitentiary, and because nobody wants to work for the Bureau of Prisons, what ends up happening is maximum security prisons they're just on lockdown, sometimes 24 hours, 23 hours a day. And for somebody who is 79 years old, who is an elder, who has diagnosed with diabetes, he's been diagnosed with sleep apnea. They have a sleep apnea machine, but no plug-in to plug in that sleep apnea machine. He's 80% blind in one eye now. He's in a walker, and I was just there this weekend. I went into the prison on Monday, on Saturday, Sunday, and then I was in the hearing on Monday. He's in rough shape. He also has an aortic aneurysm that's being untreated, and then he has they don't know what's going on with his eye, because there's periods of times where his right eye periodically ends up going into where he can't see, and so he's in really rough shape. He's and he's not being tended to. In fact, we've had Leonard's lawyers have had doctors go in there and to evaluate him and to try to get them. They haven't even let an outside third party doctor do a full evaluation of him, a full exam. All that they've been able to do is collect consistent medical data of how he's been treated, and and they're not giving him proper medical care. And quite frankly, the maximum security prison at Coleman doesn't have the ability to give him the level of medical care that he deserves to have.
When you hear all this, I mean, it almost feels, Nick, like in a way, this is part of the point of imprisoning someone like Leonard Peltier, is to try to send a message, especially to Native people, but, really to many oppressed peoples in America of, if you stand up for your rights, you really can be punished for it. I mean, it really does seem like it's a continuation of the attempt to suppress the efforts of Indigenous people here in the United States for asserting, just the right to your humanity, your culture, and your land.
Absolutely. I mean, he has been suffering in incarceration for 49 years for a crime that he didn't commit. He did not assassinate those FBI agents. The ballistic evidence, showed that he didn't assassinate them. And the reality is even former prosecutor James Reynolds even came forth and said, we actually don't know who shot it. We don't know who actually pulled the trigger and was the one who killed those agents. And therefore we don't have any evidence against Leonard Peltier to show that he's the one who did it. And so this is political repression. I mean, when it really comes down to it, and this is intergenerational political repression that is ongoing. I mean, he is. I believe that his punishment and and what he's experiencing is cruel, and it's unusual, and it is different than how other folks are treated in the system. And you imagine at 79 years old, you look at any of your 79-year-old relatives on the outside of the prison right now, how much medical care that they need and how they need to be looked after as elders, and he's in there locked up, and he's struggling, and they didn't sentence him to death. That's one of the points. They did not sentence him to death. But if he continues to stay in there, he will die in prison at the hands of the government. And he's eligible for parole. He's eligible. I mean, this is his third parole hearing, and he's eligible for parole right now based on the statute. And the parole commission is supposed to be an independent body, not influenced by the FBI, not influenced by other parts of the judiciary, and law enforcement.
Nick, can you put this in the context of the U.S. genocide on Native Americans and this is essentially an attack on a political activist for Indigenous rights. So can you place it in that context of the struggle for the rights of Native Americans who are still struggling against many things like that? I mean, this is like, we like to think of, this is like it was a genocide that was completed, but there's obviously still a lot happening, and there are reservations across the country. There are treaties that are not being abided by between the U.S. and various Native American tribes. So can you talk a bit about that and place Leonard Peltier's imprisonment in the context of suppressing activism around this very important issue?
Absolutely. I'll share a little bit. I mean, I testified in the parole hearing on some of this stuff. And one of the things that I said, one of the reasons why Leonard Peltier is so revered is because if you think about Leonard Peltier's incarceration and his prosecution, his rights were consistently violated the entire time. Constitutional rights were not applied to him. Witnesses were coerced, his rights were violated, and he was disregarded and he was dehumanized. Well, that is consistent with what they have done for their entire policy in treating Indigenous people and oppressed people everywhere. The playbook is consistent with how they treated us and how they continue to treat us, and that's why all of us see a little bit of ourselves in Leonard Peltier, is we can relate to that injustice. You know, you think about the Constitution of the United States. And Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution states that treaties are the supreme law of the land. That's Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution. There's over 600 treaties between the United States government and Native nations. Every single one of those treaties was violated. That means every single one of those treaties was a constitutional violation. And now you look at, what is the result of that? The violation of those treaties meant land loss, stealing of land. It meant that the extraction of resources from those land, and it meant our people living in abject poverty today. Today, Indigenous people in the United States have the lowest life expectancy of any people in the entire Western Hemisphere. We live in extreme poverty conditions. The racial wealth gap between white people and Indigenous people in the United States is for every $1 that a white person has, a Native person has 8 cents. That represents a 92% racial wealth gap in this country. And so this is deliberate, and it is consistent with how the United States has colonized Indigenous people, violated our rights, and eroded their own laws in the process. This form of democracy has been eroded constantly and persistently because they have no regard to their own laws whenever they're trying to colonize a people, steal a people's land, extract resources, and prioritize profits and corporations over human rights and people. And so when you think of that entire history, you think of the boarding schools that they took the children away from their mothers and their fathers and their grandmothers and their grandmothers. That they washed our mouth out of soap, that they sexually abused our people, did that as a strategy to assimilate Indigenous people and to exterminate the spirit and the culture within us. Leonard Peltier is actually a boarding school survivor. Some people don't know this. He survived the boarding school era. And so what you have in this moment is you have one of the longest living political prisoners incarcerated in American history, who's a survivor of the boarding schools, when America is just beginning to have some conversations about what the reckoning with that dark past. So, Leonard's been in prison for so long that it interweaves American history. And many of the things that the American Indian movement fought for and Leonard Peltier fought for did contribute to changes that we have today. For example, Native American Freedom of Religion Act was passed. The Indian Determination and Education Act that gave us the ability to control our own schools. The American Indian movement created the conditions for systematic change to begin to happen on Indigenous terms. But he has never been able to reap the benefits of that work because he's been incarcerated for 49 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, Nick, I know we're going to be awaiting the outcome here. I don't know, maybe for some weeks in terms of the parole hearing itself. But for those who have heard this story for the first time, or maybe you're getting refreshed or whatever it may be, who want to learn more and perhaps help Leonard, where should they look? Where should they go?
They can follow at NDN Collective on all social media handles. They can follow the Land Back for the People podcast that we have. They also, they can go to ndncollective.org and justiceforleonardpeltier.org and continue to go, continue to follow the information as we put out. Yesterday or 2 days ago marked the first. So they have 21 days to make the decision under statute. They usually will take all 21 days, so it's looking at like around July 11th. Is when we think that they're going to make the decision. They are deliberating now about the decision around parole, and quite frankly, the opposition is heavy. The director for Ray of the FBI, our current director, weighed in, has weighed in opposition to parole. But on the other hand, you had hundreds of tribal nations, leaders from around the world, the Pope, different ones that are in support of Leonard Peltier and in support of his release. He has wide support throughout the country and throughout the world. So keep following the story. His release, when it happens, will be historic. But we are definitely in a battle, both a battle for his life, a battle for the narrative, and in the battle for justice.
Nick Tilsen, Oglala Lakota, and President and CEO of the NDN Collective. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you.